a gentleman that I'm sure will delight and inform and inspire you. I heard this gentleman speaking at Green Lake 12 or so years ago, long before I even was really sure what the Baha'i faith was. Somebody got me up here, and this was one of the people I heard, and obviously his talk must have had some effect, as the whole weekend did, because here I stand. This gentleman is Mr. Stephen Birkland, and he is what we call an auxiliary board member for protection, and he formerly was an auxiliary board member for propagation in this particular geographic area. And so he is known to many of the Baha'is of longer years duration than I. And in trying to explain what that means or who that is or what he is, he explained to me that I should share with you the fact that the Baha'i faith has no clergy. And as such, we all, as individuals, share the responsibility for whatever goes on in the faith. And yet, there are institutions of individuals that are appointed to aid and assist us. And this gentleman is one of those individual institution members. So without anything else to say except that I hope you welcome very warmly, I will introduce to you Mr. Stephen Birkland.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have to get some chalk. Thank you. Thank you for waiting. I'm sorry for the poor fellow that's trying to videotape this because he can't just set it and lock it, because I think I'll probably move around a little bit. I'm very pleased to be here. It's really wonderful to see everybody. I haven't been to Green Lake for a long time, and that's sort of one of these rites of fall. Every fall, when seemed like on our way to Green Lake, and we know that fall is here, and fall's one of my favorite seasons. So, among three others. Well, I started thinking about this thing about vision. And what the way we look at the world and the way we maybe ought to look at the world according to the Baha'i teachings. Paul Ample did a fantastic job of sharing with us some of the vision from the writings, particularly some of the deep theological truths that are taught really throughout all the world's religions, but are particularly emphasized and fulfilled actually by the coming of Baha'u'llah. But I wanted to just think for a minute about what struck me was that there was a sort of a feeling like, gee, that isn't my vision. And the difference, the relief or the contrast between the vision that Paul was reading from the Holy Writings of the Baha'i faith and my vision was, there was a big difference. And it worried me, and I thought tonight maybe what I could do, just briefly, because this won't take very long, and because it's warm and it's late and so on, but I want to take a few minutes to talk about this difference between the vision that we ought to have, because that's what the whole conference is about, checking our vision and making sure that it's right, because we have a lot of work to do as Baha'is and a lot of work to do as human beings on this planet. And if we're not, if things aren't too clear or a little foggy or something, let me ask you to consider this. It's almost, can you hear me? All right. It's almost like, sorry to the people that are taping this too. It's almost like, here's the goal. All right. And if we can't see it clearly, we might go off track. Right? That's one part of this. There's another part that we have to understand where we are in relationship to this goal. Because if we're here, or if we think we're here, we're going to be going in that direction towards the goal. But if we think we're here, but we're really here, and we go in that direction, we're going to miss. So part of this is knowing more about the goal and that vision and so on of what this goal is all about. And there's some beautiful passages that Paul alluded to in the World Order of Baha'u'llah, where Shoghi Effendi explains what this new world is going to be like when it's transformed. In so many different aspects, I really encourage you to read it. And anybody that wants to read it and wants to know what book that's in and where it's at, ask me after the talk and I'll tell you about this. But there's also a lot that we have to consider about ourselves. And I think this is the vision part of clearing. The vision check has to do with both the goal and where we are. And tonight, I want to talk a little bit about this goal. And hopefully, if I do poorly, these people have given me a chance to do it again on Sunday morning, so we'll try to. But I want to read something to you. Now, this is from the writings of Abdu'l-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah. He said, now imagine yourself for a minute. You've got a lot of money, right? Just imagine. Imagine you've got a lot of money and you've got lots of time. All right, lots of time, lots of money, and you say, I want to do a little traveling, okay? I'm going to go over to my local travel agent and plan a little vacation. I've got all the money. I can go anywhere in the world I want, right? And I've got all the time in the world, all right? And you go to your travel agent, and your travel agent suggests you go to Iran. Why are you laughing? There must be something about Iran that doesn't sound like a very pleasant vacation right now. Is it because you're Baha'i or because you're American or what? It doesn't, or because it's in total chaos? Or because they're arresting people for no reason, it seems? Imprisoning people, the human rights are out the window and all. I mean, it seems like it's in total disorder in that country. The economy's bad. I mean, this place is in really tough shape. Right? Well, imagine, now that's our vision, right? That's our view of Iran right now. Here's the view that Abdu'l-Baha gives us of Iran. But since the dawning of this day star, referring to this religion, the Baha'i faith, was in Persia, and since from that Orient the sun shone upon the West, it is our fondest hope that the flames of love's fire should blaze ever more vehemently in that land, and that there the splendor of this holy faith should grow ever more intense. May the tumult of God's cause so shake that land to its foundations. May the spiritual force of His Word so manifest itself as to make Iran the core and focus of well-being and peace. May rectitude and conciliation and love and trust issuing forth from Iran bring immortality to all on earth. May she raise on the highest summits the banner of public order, of purest spirituality, of universal peace. That's the vision that Abdu'l-Baha has for Iran. Can you imagine? The banner of public order, of purest spirituality, rectitude and conciliation, love and trust issuing forth from Iran. Right now, there's nothing issuing forth from Iran that's very pleasant to smell. But the vision of Abdu'l-Baha is that in the future, this country, these people that were once the flower of civilization on the planet will return in even greater splendor. And so imagine our vision of Iran and Abdu'l-Baha the Master's vision of Iran. Well, why do you suppose this is happening? Well, one of the things that I found out recently, I think I found this out before, but I forgot it. But I was reading again recently in a book called, it's actually not a book, it looks like a book, but it's just a big letter. A letter written by Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith, to the Baha'is in America called, and the editor called it, The Advent of Divine Justice. And in there, I was reading about, now why in the world has this happened to Iran? And how do we figure this out? Why did Baha'u'llah come from Iran? Now how does that fit? I mean, how does the day star first came up in Iran? And what's the purpose of this? And the deterioration of Iran and so on. And apparently there's this principle in the Baha'i faith that explains this contrast. And here's the principle. The principle has to do with the fact that the Guardian wrote, Shoghi Effendi said, how often have the prophets of God, not accepting Baha'u'llah himself, chosen to appear and deliver their message in countries and amidst peoples and races at a time when they were either fast declining or had already touched the lowest depths of moral and spiritual degradation? The appalling misery and wretchedness to which the Israelites had sunk under the debasing and tyrannical rule of the pharaohs in the days preceding their exodus from Egypt under the leadership of Moses. The decline that had set in the religious and spiritual and cultural and moral life of the Jewish people at the time of the appearance of Jesus Christ. The barbarous cruelty, the gross idolatry and immorality, which had for so long been the most distressing features of the tribes of Arabia, and brought such shame upon them when Muhammad arose to proclaim his message in their midst. The indescribable state of decadence, with its attendant corruption, confusion, intolerance, and oppression in both the civil and religious life of Persia, so graphically portrayed by the pen of a considerable number of scholars, diplomats, and travelers at the hour of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. All these things demonstrate this basic and inescapable fact. To contend that the innate worthiness, the high moral standard, and the political aptitude and the social attainments of any race or nation is the reason for the appearance in its midst of any of these divine luminaries would be an absolute perversion of historical facts and would amount to a complete repudiation of the undoubted interpretation placed upon them. Now, what that means, it seems to me, is that the reason that Baha'u'llah and all of these prophets appeared in such a disgusting place as Iran and Israel and Egypt and these places, why they were so bad is because if they were so great and then produced such luminaries, such wonderful teachers and manifestations of God, then it would probably be regarded by historians and their followers and so on as some evidence of the greatness of that race. But the opposite is true. The absolute opposite is true. And so it demonstrates, according to the Baha'i writings, the power of God to transform people and societies. It demonstrates the power of God to transform societies and peoples. In fact, this principle, and I was hoping to talk more about this on Sunday, this principle we find it everywhere. Baha'u'llah, or Abdu'l-Baha, wrote a beautiful prophecy about the American Indians. And he said that when they're guided and properly educated and so on, that they'll illumine the whole earth. But he also said that their condition is not unlike the inhabitants of the Arabian Peninsula before Muhammad. So again, it's going to be a proof of the power of God. It's the same thing with individuals. Look at us. What a lot. And we're trying to establish, we're absolutely confident that we're going to establish peace through our efforts. All right? It's evidence, right? In fact, if you feel inadequate, the Guardian said, Shoghi Effendi said, if you feel inadequate, there's wisdom in it. All right? Because he said that if you had a great personality and lots of money and could speak many languages and traveled all over the world and had eloquent tongue and so on, and you converted many people to these teachings and this way of thinking and so on, and did so much for world peace, all those accomplishments would be laid to your personality. But because the opposite is true, in most of the cases, because the opposite is true, if we do anything at all for the world, it's proof of the power of God. Right? Well, I don't know. Now, I wasn't planning to say any of that at all so far. I wanted to ask you to consider, as we go through the weekend, I want you, there's a lot of mysteries that are happening around here. There's a lot of mysterious things that are happening in the world. And to try to understand that requires that we really get our vision checked. And to try to develop some framework or some context to make sense of all this. All right, it's not enough. You see, in the Baha'i faith, it's not enough to say, well, that must be God's will, or it's or some blind acceptance of some beliefs or truth. In the Baha'i faith, faith means a conscious knowledge. A conscious knowledge. And the independent investigation of truth is one of the most important principles. So the Baha'is are constantly striving to make sense out of these seeming paradoxes, these contrasts, these things where in the writings it says that America is going to lead all nations spiritually. When we look in the writings and the Guardian describes America like this, he said, it is by such means that Baha'u'llah can best demonstrate to a heedless generation His almighty power to raise up from the very midst of a people, that's us, this people, immersed in a sea of materialism, a prey to one of the most virulent and long-standing forms of racial prejudice, and notorious for its political corruption, lawlessness, laxity in moral standards, and he goes on and on. In fact, he even almost gets apologetic at one point, if I can be so liberal to say so. He said, observations such as these, however distasteful and depressing though they may be, should not in the least blind us to those virtues and qualities of high intelligence and youthfulness and unbounded initiative and enterprise and so on. Some of the good qualities about America that hopefully, once they're infused with the Spirit, will help us lead all nations spiritually. All right. But this is just an amazing mystery to me. How this could possibly be true. And so it's important for us to develop some context. And we're all struggling to do that, to develop some framework. And I certainly am not going to be one that will try to impose on you some framework or some rigid set of principles or whatever, that the way I understand these things. And ask you to try to do that. But it seems like there's certain forces and things that are happening right now that I've picked up from reading the letters that are coming from the Universal House of Justice, the supreme administrative body. I've said it before, and I really think that the Universal House of Justice is sort of giving us the play-by-play. You know, that's a sports term, by telling us what's happening exactly right now. All right, you know, when you listen to the radio or watch a sports event on TV, there's these announcers and so on, and they tell you what's happening in case you don't understand all the rules or see everything. They let you know what's going on. And it almost seems like these letters that are coming from our Universal House of Justice are giving us the play-by-play. And some of the things that I've noticed recently in these letters, I wanted to share with you tonight, just sort of briefly. All right. And I also want to share with you something that I ran across in the teachings. This is great. The Guardian said that sometimes at the height of a crisis itself, more often when the crisis was past, the significance of these trials has manifested itself to men's eyes. Seldom, Shoghi Effendi wrote, seldom, if indeed at any time, has the mystery underlying these portentous God-sent upheavals remain undisclosed. What that means to me is that we can figure it out. It doesn't have to be a mystery to us. He said the mystery underlying these things has been disclosed. Sometimes in the midst of the crisis and other times after it's over. But one way or the other, we'll figure it out. And one of the ways that we do that, of course, is with the Universal House of Justice. Now, there's something that Paul mentioned that I want to elaborate on just a little bit. He mentioned these forces of disintegration and integration, the twin processes that Baha'u'llah wrote about and Abdu'l-Baha explained and Shoghi Effendi really wrote so much about. Help us so much to understand what's going on in the world, because everything, as I've said before from this stage, everything that's happening in the world is either helping this cause or it's helping this cause. All right? Everything, and in fact, even though there are maybe destructive things, they're really helping this cause. And everything, it seems, that happens in the world, even if it appears to be a crisis, ultimately helps us. Ultimately helps us. Let me give you an example. On a real individual level, one of the early believers that was just an angel, he was really something. His name was Haji Mirza Hyder Ali. And this man, he became a Babi during the time of the Bab, even before Baha'u'llah declared his mission. And then he, of course, became a follower of Baha'u'llah after Baha'u'llah declared his mission, and after Baha'u'llah died, he was one of the greatest servants of Abdu'l-Baha, the successor to Baha'u'llah. And he did so many things. There's so many stories written about Haji Mirza Hyder Ali and so on. But one of the stories that I thought was kind of cute. Actually, it was probably very much a tragedy for him, but he laughed about it, so I guess we can too a little bit. He was on pilgrimage, and pilgrimage for us is such a wonderful thing and so on, but he had just finished up 14 years in prison, all right, in the Sudan. Right. He was arrested in Egypt and transferred to a prison in the Sudan in this desert in Africa, and was there for years and years, more than a decade he was there. And he was finally released from prison, and he didn't know where to go. He got on his boat. He ended up in Arabia and so on, and he didn't know what happened, what to do. And there's an interesting story. I wish we had lots of time, but we're running out fast. I might not even get to this framework stuff. Well, what happened was he heard some people speaking Persian, and he found out they were Baha'is. Right? Now, the person that was speaking Persian this is going to sound funny, didn't even know why he was there. Didn't even know I was there. He was one of the followers of Baha'u'llah. He was a merchant. His name was Yazdi. Some of you even have met Aziz Yazdi. All right? It was his father. He was a merchant, and he was asked by Abdu'l-Baha, he was summoned by Abdu'l-Baha, and was told that Baha'u'llah wanted him to go to Arabia. All right? He was in Akka, in Israel at the time. It wasn't Israel, it was Palestine at the time. He was summoned by Abdu'l-Baha, and Abdu'l-Baha said, Baha'u'llah wants you to go to Arabia right away. Get on that ship, it's leaving. And he says, well, if you don't mind, if I can have your permission, I'd like to go and pay my respects to Baha'u'llah before leaving. And he says, you don't have time, get on the ship. He just got on the ship, he went to Arabia. On his way, and this story is documented, on his way, it occurred to him that he didn't ask why. So he thought, well, I'm sure it's going to work out. Well, he got to Arabia, and he was standing there on the dock and wondering, now, I wonder why I'm here. I wonder why the Blessed Beauty, that's one of the names of Baha'u'llah, the Blessed Beauty, Jamali Mubarak. He was wondering why the Blessed Beauty, Baha'u'llah, had sent him there, and he heard some people speaking Persian. And he looked, and there was Haji Mirza Hyder Ali, who had just been released after 14 years in prison, who didn't know what to do either. And then he realized that he was sent to pick up Hyder Ali. All right? So they got on a boat and they went back to Akka, and that's precisely what Baha'u'llah wanted him to do. Right? So Hyder Ali was there on pilgrimage, and he was just basking in the sunshine of the love of Baha'u'llah, the manifestation of God. And after all these years, he knew that he would. In fact, before he was in prison, that was one of the things that kept him going. Is that Baha'u'llah, before he said goodbye to Hyder Ali, he told him that he would see him again. And so he knew that he wouldn't die in this filthy prison in the middle of the desert in Africa. He knew he wouldn't die because he knew Baha'u'llah said, I'll see you again. So there he was 14 years later, I think, something like that. He was back in Akka, but it was getting time to leave. And he asked if it would be possible to stay just 2 more weeks. And it was granted. And after 2 more weeks were up, he thought, I really don't want to go. This is so, great. And he asked for permission for 2 more weeks. And it was granted. And then he went kind of sheepishly to Baha'u'llah again, and he said, I know the time is up and you've given me 2 extensions already. He says, I wonder if it's possible that I could stay just 15 days longer. And Baha'u'llah said, I wish I could find it and read it because it was so funny. He said, I was summoned to go to Baha'u'llah's room. He smiled and told me, you can stay 15 days more. But on the condition that someone will guarantee your departure at that time. Baha'u'llah said, and this is, these are Pilgrim's notes. These aren't the exact words of Baha'u'llah, but these are the memories of Hyder Ali. He said, Baha'u'llah said, we want you to return home very happy, but do not forget the condition. Someone must guarantee that you will leave. And right away, Hyder Ali said, the master. I'm referring to Abdul Baha. He said, he can be my guarantee. I'm sure that he'll agree to, help me out. And of course he did. He said, when I got back to the pilgrim house where all the other Baha'is were staying, that were visiting Akka at the time in that area, he said, I danced. I actually danced. I was so happy that I got to stay 15 days more. Well, when he was getting ready to leave after that 15 days, it was just so wonderful. He had really, he'd come from absolute nothing in this prison, having absolutely nothing. Right? Abject poverty. During the time he was in Haifa, he had transcribed tablets and he'd done some work in the community and so on. And he'd actually earned some money. And he had money with him and gold coins and fine dress and everything. And he was really doing pretty good that way materially. And Abdul Baha came up to him and he said, would you be happy if you lost all that you now possess? And I said, the Hyder Ali said, I would be in the same position as when I left Persia years ago. I did not have a penny then, and I will not mind if I'm penniless when I return home. I do not care for anything so long as I can keep my faith and love. You made me rich when I offered my possessions to you. You accepted them and then returned them to me. And all that time, I could not understand what the master intended by this conversation. Well, when he got back to Iran, actually he hadn't even made it to Iran. He was in Kurdistan, in the Iraqi Kurdistan. You've probably even heard about it in the news now. Because Iraq is being accused, of sending poison gas tried to kill the Kurds and so on. He was in that area, and of course they weren't very receptive to the Baha'i faith at that time. No one was real interested, even though they loved Baha'u'llah, because Baha'u'llah years ago had spent 2 years among them. And they loved Baha'u'llah and so on, but they weren't very receptive to these teachings and so on, and frankly were quite hostile to Persians. And Hyder Ali, of course, was a Persian and he was a Baha'i. And he was in this area on his way back to Iran, and he was attacked. The caravan he was with, he was attacked. And they stole absolutely everything. I mean, they even took his clothes, his horse. They took everything. He said, I was standing there naked. All right. I had nothing. I haven't even gotten back to Iran. And I had nothing, absolutely nothing. And before he left, Abdul Baha had given him several precious tablets that Baha'u'llah had just revealed. And they were to be delivered to Iran. And Abdul Baha told him to make sure that when he got in the vicinity, when he got close to Iran, that he should give those tablets to someone that he could trust. And he did. He gave them to somebody near Baghdad, and he said, when I get to Iran, please send them to me at this address and so on. And now just think of the wisdom of Abdul Baha. How do you explain those mysteries? How do you explain the fact that Abdul Baha was saying, and before he left, he said, what do you think would happen? How would you feel if you lost everything? Right? Well, as it turns out, there was this fellow. Boy, we're running out of time. We haven't even got to the framework stuff yet. there was this fella, his name was, I think it was Niraki. If I pronounced that right, please forgive me, you Persians in the audience. Niraki, I think, was his name. His first name was Aghajan. Name Niraki. He was one of these people. I think he must have been something like, for us from the Christian background, he must have been kind of like Saul. Remember Saul? Persecuting the Christians, converted, became Paul and so on. Well, Aghajan, he really persecuted the Baha'is, really gave them a hard time and so on. But he became Baha'i. He met Hyder Ali and became Baha'i and just fell in love with the faith and decided he was going to travel, teach, and make up for all the nasty things he'd done and so on. And was out travel teaching one day and was attacked by highway robbers too. Stole everything from him. And he looked up in the sky and he says, "My God, how can you do this to Aghajan?" And you know what? Sometime later he got a tablet from Baha'u'llah, and Baha'u'llah in the tablet said, "We heard your whisperings." And Baha'u'llah said, "And you're right. You're right. It's no way to treat Aghajan." And he became very prosperous after that. But together, this Aghajan, Niraki, and Hyder Ali made a great teaching team. And they talked to many of the Kurds there in the Kurdistan and had marvelous time there. And there were other Baha'is too that he met. And I have to just read just briefly what this Hyder Ali said about all this. He said, "Complaints were sent to the governor, but to no avail. I wrote a letter to the Holy Land and said that in a lighthearted fashion, he said, I obeyed and entrusted all the tablets and holy writings to a friend upon arrival in Iran. But what would have happened if the same instructions had been given for the care and protection of the property of this servant?" He kind of said, "I wish you had told me to give my money to someone else too." Many people came to our help, but none ever succeeded in locating the highway robbers nor in retrieving our possessions. The last one who came to our help was Mirza Abdullah Khan was his name, the maternal grandfather of Janabi Varga. And these names may not make any sense to you at all, but the Janabi Varga that he's referring to was a great, great Baha'i teacher and so on. And this Mirza Abdullah Khan was a great, great Baha'i teacher too, and a very spiritual man. And Hyder Ali said it was a great honor to be with this friend and to be aware of his spiritual excellence. As the days passed, I thanked God every moment that the loss of these ephemeral possessions gave me a chance to spend a few days with him. So Hyder Ali realized that this crisis was really a victory. It was really a triumph. And although he lost everything, there was this dialectic of crisis and victory even on the personal level. In fact, there's a promise about this. I ran across this. This is from one of the tablets of Baha'u'llah. He said, "Nothing save that which profiteth them can befall my loved ones." Nothing. That's because if we clear up the vision and we have the right vision, we'll see that everything that happens is for the good of this cause. In other words, one of the things that Paul was emphasizing in his talk seemed to be that this is a revelation from God, that it is inevitable that peace will be established. Nothing can stop it. Nothing. A few things, some unwisdom of some of us believers and so on might slow it down a little bit. But nothing's going to stop it. It will, and everything that's happening in the world, whether it's inside the Baha'i community or outside, to the governments, are all either tearing down all the barriers to world unity or creating more opportunities for Baha'is and like-minded people around the world to spread these teachings. Here's what it says in our writings. A force and this is written by the Bab actually, vibrates within the innermost being of all created things, and which, according to Baha'u'llah, has through its vibrating influence upset the equilibrium of the world and revolutionized its ordered life. Such a force, and he writes with a capital F, this force acting as even as a two-edged sword is under our very eyes, sundering on one hand the age-old ties which for centuries have held together the fabric of civilized society, and as unloosening on the other the bonds that still fetter the infant and as yet unemancipated faith of Baha'u'llah. So everything that's happening in the world in this twin process is either contributing to the disintegration of an obsolete order, all these limitations and restrictions, all these jealousies and prejudices and so on that are preventing us from realizing world peace, or they're creating more and more opportunities for the spread of this awareness, for the expansion of this vision of world peace. All of these things are either helping the cause or they're helping the cause. In fact, I want to read something from Baha'u'llah. This is one of the most delightful tablets that I've seen from Baha'u'llah. It's so wonderful. He just says, very simply, he said, although the author of the following saying had intended it otherwise, yet we find it pertinent to the operation of God's immutable will. And here's the saying, even or odd, thou shalt win the wager. The friends of God shall win and profit under all conditions. In other words, if we react to criticism with love, if we approach people that are strangers with love, if we act as the friends of God in all our behavior and so on, we win. No matter what happens to us, we win. The friends of God shall win and profit under all conditions, and shall attain true wealth. In fire, they remain cold. And from water, they emerge dry. Their affairs are at variance with the affairs of men. Gain is their lot, whatever the deal. Baha'u'llah said, isn't that nice? Baha'u'llah in one of his tablets says, gain is their lot, whatever the deal. To this testifieth every wise one with a discerning eye, and every fair-minded one with a hearing ear. Well, let me finish up by saying that one of the things that I want you to try to do during this conference, and I'm going to try to do this too, is that as we go to the workshops and spend time with each other, which is incidentally a deepening experience in itself, because Baha'u'llah said one of the teachings of the Baha'i faith is that we should consort with the loved ones of God. As we interact this weekend and listen to the speakers and go to the workshops and so on, let's try to put some perspective to what's happening in the world. Because this is a great time. Even Shoghi Effendi, look at all of the manifestations of God. I read earlier about some of the manifestations of God, Muhammad and Jesus and Moses and so on. Each one of them appeared in a despicable place. And one of the things that was also common to them is that they took a retreat. They took a retreat. Muhammad went into the desert, into the mountains. So did Moses. Jesus went into the wilderness. Baha'u'llah, as I mentioned before, went into the mountains of Kurdistan for 2 years. And we've got a chance this weekend to kind of gain some spiritual strength, to relax, spend time with the loved ones of God, eat a lot probably, sleep as much as possible, but really, generally, regenerate and get our vision checked, really. Well, one of the things that I want to ask you to do then is to try to develop a perspective that is congruent with this idea that everything that happens in the world is for your profit. That's a statement from Baha'u'llah himself. Nothing can befall my loved ones, but that which profiteth them. Nothing. How can we reconcile that with all the things that happen? It's sort of like that Aghajan. Is this any way to treat me? You know, sometimes I feel like Aghajan out there in the Kurdistan. What's happening? Why me, Lord? But nothing but that which profited them can befall his loved ones. Nothing. Now, how can we reconcile that? I believe that if you can reconcile that, you've really got your vision checked. You've really achieved something. All right? And also, on a more collective level, everything that happens in the world is aiding the development of world peace. And how can we reconcile that when all around we see chaos? How can we reconcile that in our minds? Well, that's another challenge for the weekend. Let me finish. I don't know how I'm going to finish. I just thought I'd buy some time. This is great. You know, I can do anything. All right, here we go. That's what I was looking for, of course. If, however, Baha'u'llah said, if, however, for a few days, in compliance with God's all-encompassing wisdom, outward affairs should run their course contrary to one's cherished desire, this is of no consequence and should not matter. I've told many of you before that I've seen many times when I'm coming home after a hard day, Najla, my wife, says, "How was it?" I said, "Well, things ran their course contrary to my cherished desire today." There's another one where Abdu'l-Baha said that when sadness visits us, that the actualities of life seem to elude our grasp. And sometimes I say that to Najla too. I say, today the actualities of life seem to have eluded my grasp. Well, let me finish by reading the rest of this quotation. Baha'u'llah on this tablet said, if this happens for a few days, in compliance with God's all-encompassing wisdom, this is of no consequence and should not matter. Our intent is that all the friends should fix their gaze on the supreme horizon. You know, another time when I was here, I asked you to consider that when you're riding in a car and you look down at the ground and all the things going by so fast, if you try to figure them out, if you try to really stare at that stuff, it'll make you sick. And it's the same thing that happens in my life, in the world around us. If we try to figure all this out, it's going by so fast like that, you become nauseated. But if you're in the car and you lift your head up to the horizon, everything comes into focus. It's all serene. And you can anticipate the turns and what's going to happen and forget about this stuff. Remember, Baha'u'llah said, it should not matter, and it's of no consequence. Our intent is that all the friends should fix their gaze on the supreme horizon and cling to that which hath been revealed in the holy tablets. This is the time, folks, this weekend, when we can really fix our gaze on those things, because speaker after speaker and workshop after workshop and believer after believer that we run into is going to be talking about these holy tablets. These things have been revealed. Hopefully the conversation will be all about these things. And we can really try to get our vision checked. Thanks for your attention.